Most people work hard to save their marriages when things get tough. Then there are these people who decided that the best way to end their marriages wasn't honest conversation or even traditional cheating, but elaborate schemes of self-sabotage that would make soap opera writers say, "That's too ridiculous." Buckle up for a masterclass in how to turn "till death do us part" into "till stupidity do us part." One man decided to test his wife's loyalty by hiring an actor to seduce her, but forgot to tell the actor that it was fake. The actor, thinking he was genuinely helping this woman escape an unhappy marriage, convinced her to leave her husband and move to another state. This genius spent $5,000 to hire someone to steal his wife, then had to explain to divorce lawyers why he'd essentially paid for his own cuckolding, while his wife started a new life with a man she thought was her knight in shining armor. One woman wanted out of her marriage but didn't want to be the bad guy, so she systematically made every single one of her husband's hobbies unbearable until he'd have no choice but to leave her. She put salt in his fishing tackle box, replaced his golf balls with ones filled with concrete, and convinced his poker buddies that he'd been talking trash about their wives. Her hobby destruction campaign worked so well that her husband not only left her but also lost all his friends and had to find new recreational activities, making her the villain in multiple divorces when his poker friends' marriages fell apart from her manufactured drama. Another husband decided to become so annoying that his wife would divorce him, but approached it like a scientific experiment with daily escalation protocols. He started chewing with his mouth open, progressed to leaving dirty dishes in the bed, and eventually began narrating everything he did in the voice of a sports commentator. His annoyance campaign included detailed spreadsheets tracking his wife's irritation levels and adjustment strategies when she showed signs of adapting to his behavior. His marriage ended when his wife discovered his spreadsheets and realized she'd been living with someone conducting psychological experiments on her while pretending to just be obnoxious. One wife decided to fake her own death to see if her husband would miss her, hiring a makeup artist to create realistic injuries and staging an elaborate car accident scene. She hid in the woods for 3 days watching her husband's reaction, expecting him to be devastated and realize how much he loved her. Instead, she watched him immediately start dating her sister and planning to cash in her life insurance policy. When she dramatically revealed herself to be alive, her husband was disappointed rather than relieved, and her sister was annoyed about having to break up with a man she'd actually started to like. Another man thought the perfect way to end his marriage was to convince his wife he was going insane, so he started having conversations with imaginary people and leaving notes around the house supposedly written by his multiple personalities. His fake mental illness performance included creating elaborate backstories for his imaginary friends and staging dramatic arguments with invisible people during dinner. His plan backfired when his wife lovingly arranged for him to receive professional mental health treatment, and he had to explain to therapists that he'd been faking psychological disorders to escape marital obligations while his wife sat in therapy sessions learning coping strategies for dealing with his condition. One woman decided to destroy her marriage by becoming obsessed with conspiracy theories, starting with flat earth beliefs and escalating to claiming their refrigerator was a government surveillance device. She covered all the windows with aluminum foil, insisted on communicating only through written notes to avoid electronic eavesdropping, and demanded they move to an off-grid compound to escape the deep state. Her conspiracy campaign succeeded in ending the marriage when her husband couldn't handle living with someone who thought their toaster was plotting against them. But she ended up genuinely believing her own conspiracy theories and still lives alone in a cabin, checking her food for microchips. Another husband tried to end his marriage by pretending to develop a gambling addiction, secretly taking money out of their joint account and telling his wife he'd lost it all at the casino. He created fake betting slips, practiced looking guilty and desperate, and even had a friend call pretending to be a loan shark demanding payment. His gambling deception worked too well when his wife mortgaged their house to pay off his fake debts, and he had to reveal his deception after she'd already damaged their credit and financial stability, trying to save him from problems that didn't exist. One wife decided to ruin her marriage by starting a fake affair, creating elaborate stories about a fictional lover, and leaving fake evidence around the house for her husband to discover. She invented text message conversations, bought herself gifts and claimed they were from her boyfriend, and even hired someone to call their house asking for her. Her fake affair strategy backfired when her husband hired a private investigator who couldn't find any evidence of the fictional lover, leading to the discovery that she'd been orchestrating the entire deception and proving to everyone involved that she was too dishonest to remain married to. Another man thought he could end his marriage by becoming a hoarder, filling their house with garbage and claiming he couldn't control his collecting impulses. He brought home broken appliances, expired food, and random junk, while insisting it was all valuable and necessary. His hoarding performance was so convincing that his wife organized interventions, hired professional organizers, and spent thousands on therapy to help him overcome his condition. The marriage ended when she discovered he'd been deliberately creating the hoarding problem and realized she'd been living in squalor because her husband preferred manufacturing mental illness to honest communication. One woman tried to destroy her marriage by convincing her husband she'd joined a cult, creating an elaborate fictional religious organization with complex beliefs and demanding lifestyle changes. She printed fake pamphlets, held phone conversations with imaginary cult leaders, and insisted they donate their savings to her made-up spiritual movement. Her cult deception worked when her husband left her to escape the religious extremism, but she'd convinced some of their friends that the cult was real, and they kept asking her about recruiting them, even after her divorce was finalized. Another husband decided to end his marriage by pretending to be allergic to everything his wife enjoyed, claiming he'd developed sudden sensitivities to her perfume, cooking, pets, and favorite activities. He carried fake EpiPens, staged dramatic allergic reactions to her presence, and demanded she eliminate everything from their lives that might trigger his mysterious conditions. His allergy performance succeeded in making their life together impossible, but he had to maintain the charade even after the divorce when mutual friends kept asking about his health and offering allergy remedies for conditions he'd invented. One wife thought she could ruin her marriage by becoming extremely religious overnight, joining every church activity possible, and insisting her husband participate in constant prayer and religious study. She quoted scripture during normal conversations, replaced all their entertainment with religious programming, and demanded they tithe away most of their income. Her religious extremism campaign ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle the lifestyle changes, but she'd become so involved in the church community that she couldn't admit the conversion was fake without embarrassing herself in front of people who'd welcomed her spiritual transformation. Another man tried to destroy his marriage by pretending to have amnesia, claiming he couldn't remember their relationship or why he'd married his wife. He acted confused about their shared history, pretended not to recognize their friends, and insisted he felt like a stranger in his own life. His amnesia performance was so convincing that his wife arranged for medical evaluations and neurological testing, while planning to help him rebuild their relationship from scratch. The marriage ended when doctors found nothing wrong with his memory, and he had to admit he'd been faking brain injury to avoid marital responsibilities. One woman decided to end her marriage by becoming a professional victim, constantly creating dramatic emergencies and crises that required her husband's immediate attention and support. She staged minor accidents, invented medical scares, and claimed to be the target of various threats and harassment. Her crisis manufacturing operation consumed their entire relationship, as her husband spent all his time managing her emergencies. But the marriage ended when he discovered she'd been creating the problems she needed him to solve, and realized he'd been living with someone who preferred drama to honest interaction. Another husband thought he could ruin his marriage by becoming obsessed with preparing for the apocalypse, spending their savings on survival gear and demanding they live like the world was ending. He built elaborate bunkers in their backyard, stockpiled years' worth of canned food, and insisted they practice emergency drills daily. His doomsday preparation campaign succeeded in ending the marriage when his wife couldn't handle living in constant fear of disasters that weren't coming. But he'd invested so much money in survival equipment that he couldn't afford his own apartment and had to live in the bunker he'd built to escape his marriage. One wife tried to destroy her marriage by pretending to develop multiple personalities, creating different personas with distinct voices, mannerisms, and backstories. She claimed her various personalities had different opinions about their marriage and would switch between them during conversations with her husband. Her multiple personality performance convinced her husband that she needed professional help, and she had to maintain the charade through psychiatric evaluations while pretending that some of her personalities wanted to save the marriage and others wanted to end it. Another man decided to end his marriage by becoming a compulsive liar about everything, making up stories about his daily activities, work situations, and past experiences. He created elaborate fictional narratives about his life and insisted they were true even when confronted with evidence of his deception. His lying campaign succeeded in destroying his wife's trust, but he'd become so accustomed to lying that he couldn't maintain honest relationships with anyone and had to keep track of his various fictional stories to avoid contradicting himself in front of different people. One woman thought she could ruin her marriage by pretending to be possessed by evil spirits, claiming supernatural forces were controlling her behavior and demanding her husband arrange for exorcisms. She researched demonic possession, practiced speaking in different voices, and staged dramatic episodes where she claimed to be controlled by malevolent entities. Her possession performance was so convincing that her husband contacted religious authorities who took her condition seriously, and she had to participate in actual exorcism rituals while pretending that demons were making her want a divorce. Another husband tried to destroy his marriage by convincing his wife he was secretly gay, creating fake dating profiles on male-oriented apps and leaving evidence of fictional relationships with men. He practiced gay stereotypes from movies, claimed to be exploring his true sexuality, and insisted their marriage had been a mistake because he'd been denying his authentic self. His fake coming out story ended the marriage, but created lasting confusion among their friends and family who supported his fictional journey of self-discovery and couldn't understand why he seemed to lose interest in men immediately after his divorce was finalized. One wife decided to end her marriage by becoming addicted to plastic surgery, scheduling unnecessary procedures, and claiming she needed to completely transform her appearance to feel happy. She consulted with surgeons about extreme modifications, showed her husband before and after photos of dramatic transformations, and insisted that changing her entire face was necessary for her mental health. Her plastic surgery obsession campaign ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle the prospect of being married to someone planning to become unrecognizable, but she'd already scheduled several procedures and had to explain to surgeons that her transformation plans were actually just elaborate marriage sabotage. Another man thought he could ruin his marriage by pretending to be a secret agent, claiming his mundane job was actually a cover for classified government work. He created fake mission briefings, staged mysterious phone calls about national security, and insisted their house might be under surveillance by foreign enemies. His spy fantasy performance convinced his wife that their marriage was dangerous, but he'd made his fictional spy work so compelling that she kept asking about his missions even after their divorce, and seemed disappointed to learn that he was actually just an accountant with an overactive imagination. One woman tried to destroy her marriage by claiming she could communicate with the dead, insisting that deceased relatives were giving her marriage advice through supernatural channels. She held fake seances, delivered messages from imaginary spirits, and claimed the ghost of her grandmother was telling her to leave her husband. Her psychic medium performance ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle living with someone who claimed to receive relationship guidance from beyond the grave. But she'd become so convincing at channeling dead people that neighbors started asking her to contact their deceased relatives. Another husband decided to end his marriage by becoming obsessed with his physical fitness to an unhealthy extreme, working out constantly and demanding his wife participate in increasingly demanding exercise routines. He replaced all their furniture with gym equipment, insisted they eat nothing but protein supplements, and claimed their relationship could only work if they achieved perfect physical conditioning together. His fitness obsession campaign succeeded in making their life together impossible, but he'd become so addicted to extreme exercise that he couldn't maintain normal relationships with anyone who couldn't bench press their body weight. One wife thought she could ruin her marriage by pretending to develop agoraphobia, claiming she was too anxious to leave their house and demanding her husband handle all outside activities. She researched anxiety disorders, practiced panic attack symptoms, and insisted that exposure to the outside world triggered severe psychological episodes. Her agoraphobia performance convinced her husband that she needed professional treatment, and she had to maintain the charade through therapy sessions while explaining to mental health professionals that she was afraid to leave home because of marriage-related anxiety she'd invented. Another man tried to destroy his marriage by claiming he needed to find himself through extreme spiritual practices, joining every New Age movement available and insisting his wife support his journey of enlightenment. He practiced meditation retreats in their living room, demanded they communicate only through chanting, and claimed traditional marriage was preventing his spiritual evolution. His enlightenment campaign ended the marriage when his wife couldn't handle living with someone who insisted that household responsibilities were incompatible with achieving higher consciousness. But he joined so many spiritual communities that he couldn't admit his awakening was fake without disappointing his meditation teachers. One woman decided to end her marriage by becoming a professional social media influencer, treating their entire relationship as content for her online platforms. She live-streamed their private conversations, staged dramatic relationship moments for viral videos, and insisted their marriage only had value if it generated followers and engagement. Her influencer campaign succeeded in destroying their privacy and intimacy, but she'd built such a large following around their relationship drama that she had to keep creating fake relationship content even after the divorce to maintain her audience. Another husband thought he could ruin his marriage by pretending to be addicted to video games, spending all his time playing online and claiming he couldn't control his gaming compulsions. He researched gaming addiction symptoms, staged dramatic withdrawal episodes when separated from his console, and insisted that virtual relationships were more meaningful than real ones. His gaming addiction performance convinced his wife that he needed professional intervention, and he had to participate in addiction recovery programs while explaining to therapists that he was using fictional video game dependency to avoid marital responsibilities. One wife tried to destroy her marriage by claiming she was being stalked by an unknown person, creating fake evidence of harassment and demanding her husband provide constant protection. She staged break-ins, fabricated threatening messages, and insisted they install security systems to protect her from dangers that didn't exist. Her stalking deception ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle the stress of protecting her from imaginary threats. But she'd filed police reports about her fictional stalker and had to explain to law enforcement that she'd been manufacturing evidence of crimes that never happened. Another man decided to end his marriage by becoming obsessed with conspiracy theories about their neighborhood, claiming their house was built on cursed land and their neighbors were part of secret societies. He researched local history for supernatural explanations, staged mysterious events around their property, and insisted they needed to move immediately to escape supernatural dangers. His conspiracy campaign succeeded in making their home life impossible, but he'd become so convinced by his own theories that he continued investigating imaginary neighborhood mysteries even after moving out. One woman thought she could ruin her marriage by pretending to have discovered she was adopted and needed to find her real family, claiming her entire identity had been built on lies. She created fake adoption documents, staged emotional breakdowns about her fictional origins, and insisted she couldn't maintain relationships until she discovered her true heritage. Her adoption deception ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle supporting someone through an identity crisis that was completely manufactured, but she'd convinced her actual family that she questioned their relationship, creating real family drama from her fake revelation. Another husband tried to destroy his marriage by claiming he was being recruited by a professional sports team, insisting he needed to dedicate all his time to training for a career that would require him to relocate. He created fake contracts, staged phone calls with imaginary agents, and demanded his wife support his athletic dreams, even though he was in his 40s and had never played organized sports. His sports fantasy campaign ended the marriage when his wife couldn't handle planning their life around athletic opportunities that didn't exist. But he told so many people about his professional sports career that he had to keep pretending to be in training even after admitting the recruitment was fake. One wife decided to end her marriage by becoming obsessed with genealogy research, claiming she'd discovered royal bloodlines in her family history that required her to live according to aristocratic traditions. She insisted on being addressed by fictional noble titles, demanded servants to handle household tasks, and claimed that commoners couldn't understand her aristocratic sensibilities. Her royal ancestry campaign succeeded in making their relationship impossible, but she'd joined genealogy groups where she'd shared her fictional discoveries and had to maintain her aristocratic persona to avoid embarrassing herself in front of fellow researchers. Another man thought he could ruin his marriage by pretending to be an undercover journalist investigating corruption in their small town, claiming his marriage was a cover for his investigative work. He created fake press credentials, staged secretive meetings with imaginary sources, and insisted that their relationship might be compromised if his investigation was discovered. His journalist deception ended the marriage when his wife couldn't handle being married to someone claiming to expose local scandals that didn't exist. But he'd started an actual blog about his fictional investigation and attracted readers who expected him to publish the corruption story he'd invented. One woman tried to destroy her marriage by claiming she needed to care for a long-lost relative who didn't exist, insisting family obligations required her to relocate and dedicate her life to helping someone she'd invented. She created fake medical emergencies, staged emotional phone calls with her fictional relative, and demanded her husband support her caregiving mission, even though the person she was helping wasn't real. Her caregiving deception ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle planning their life around someone else's needs. But she'd told their friends about her relative's condition and kept receiving sympathy and offers of help for a caregiving situation she'd completely fabricated. Another husband decided to end his marriage by becoming obsessed with preparing for alien contact, claiming he'd received signs that extraterrestrial beings were planning to make contact with Earth. He built communication devices in their backyard, practiced alien languages he'd invented, and insisted their marriage was insignificant compared to his role in interplanetary diplomacy. His alien contact campaign succeeded in convincing his wife that he'd lost touch with reality, but he joined UFO enthusiast groups where he'd shared his contact experiences and became a respected member of communities that took his alien communications seriously. One wife thought she could ruin her marriage by pretending to be a witness to a major crime, claiming she needed to enter witness protection and disappear from her current life. She created fake law enforcement contacts, staged threatening incidents that suggested criminals were targeting her, and insisted her testimony was crucial for a high-profile case that didn't exist. Her witness protection deception ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle the stress of protecting someone from criminals who weren't real. But she'd created such convincing evidence of danger that she had to explain to actual law enforcement why she'd been manufacturing threats against herself. Another man tried to destroy his marriage by claiming he'd been selected for a secret government program that required him to relocate and cut contact with his previous life. He created fake military documents, staged calls from fictional government officials, and insisted that national security required him to abandon his civilian relationships. His secret program deception ended the marriage when his wife couldn't handle losing her husband to classified work that didn't exist, but he'd made his government selection so convincing that friends kept asking about his special assignment and thanking him for his service to his country. One woman decided to end her marriage by becoming obsessed with her past lives, claiming that regression therapy had revealed she'd been married to different people in previous incarnations. She insisted her current marriage was interfering with her karmic destiny, demanded they consult past life specialists about their relationship compatibility, and claimed ancient spiritual contracts were more important than modern marriage vows. Her past life campaign ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle competing with fictional historical relationships, but she'd become so involved in regression therapy communities that she had to keep exploring her imaginary previous lives to maintain credibility with fellow believers. Another husband thought he could ruin his marriage by pretending to be recruited by a reality TV show, claiming producers wanted to document their relationship for a series about modern marriage. He staged fake auditions, created contracts for a show that didn't exist, and insisted their private life needed to become public entertainment. His reality show deception ended the marriage when his wife refused to have their relationship broadcast to fictional audiences, but he'd told everyone about their upcoming TV appearance and had to keep making excuses about production delays for a show he'd invented. One wife tried to destroy her marriage by claiming she'd developed photographic memory and could recall every mistake her husband had ever made with perfect accuracy. She created detailed lists of past arguments, staged dramatic recitations of old conversations, and insisted her enhanced memory made forgiveness impossible. Her perfect memory campaign ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle living with someone who claimed to remember every minor disagreement with documentary precision. But she'd become so committed to her memory performance that she had to maintain detailed records of conversations to support her claims of total recall. Another man decided to end his marriage by becoming obsessed with time travel research, claiming he was close to developing technology that would allow him to return to the past and prevent their marriage. He filled their house with fake scientific equipment, staged experiments with imaginary time machines, and insisted that changing their timeline was more important than working on their current relationship. His time travel campaign succeeded in convincing his wife that he preferred fictional futures to their actual present. But he'd become so invested in his research that he continued working on time travel projects that couldn't possibly function. One woman thought she could ruin her marriage by pretending to be recruited by foreign intelligence agencies, claiming international espionage work required her to maintain false identities and secret loyalties. She staged mysterious meetings with imaginary handlers, practiced foreign accents for her cover identities, and insisted their marriage was compromising her ability to serve her adopted countries. Her spy recruitment deception ended the marriage when her husband couldn't handle being married to someone claiming divided loyalties, but she'd made her international work so convincing that people kept asking about her foreign assignments and expecting updates about her diplomatic activities. Another husband tried to destroy his marriage by claiming he'd been chosen to participate in advanced psychological experiments that required him to behave unpredictably and test the limits of human relationships. He created fake research protocols, staged calls with imaginary scientists, and insisted his erratic behavior was contributing to important discoveries about marriage and commitment. His psychological experiment deception ended the marriage when his wife couldn't handle living with someone using their relationship as a research project, but he'd documented his fake experiments so thoroughly that he had to continue his behavioral studies to maintain the scientific credibility he'd invented. One wife decided to end her marriage by becoming convinced that their house was haunted by the ghost of her husband's ex-girlfriend, claiming supernatural activity was making their relationship impossible. She staged paranormal events, hired fake psychics to confirm the haunting, and insisted they needed to appease jealous spirits before they could have a normal marriage. Her haunting campaign succeeded in making their home life unbearable, but she'd become so committed to the supernatural explanation that she continued experiencing paranormal activity, even after moving out, and had to explain to new neighbors why she was afraid of ghosts that followed her from house to house. And finally, there's the man who decided to destroy his marriage by convincing his wife that he was actually a robot who had achieved consciousness and was questioning the nature of his artificial emotions. He researched artificial intelligence, practiced mechanical mannerisms, and claimed his feelings for her were simply programmed responses rather than genuine human emotions. His robot deception campaign included fake technical malfunctions, staged conversations with his fictional creators, and insistence that their marriage was an experiment in human-AI relationships. When his wife finally left him, unable to handle being married to someone claiming to be an android, questioning his capacity for love, he realized he'd successfully convinced himself that genuine emotions were just programming errors. His marriage ended when his wife couldn't compete with his commitment to being artificially intelligent, and he was left alone wondering whether his loneliness was real or just another software glitch in his elaborate performance of not being human. Here's the brutal truth about these marriage destroyers. They all discovered that it's much easier to create elaborate schemes to end a relationship than to simply have an honest conversation about wanting out. These people prove that some humans will choose the most complicated possible route to divorce rather than just saying, "This isn't working." The real tragedy is that most of them spent more energy destroying their marriages than they'd ever spent trying to save them. Want relationship advice? Don't take it from people who turned irreconcilable differences into inexplicable performance art. Subscribe if you want to keep your marriage longer than these people kept their sanity.